Hi guys, my name's Kieran and today I'm going to be talking with you about the development of aggression in terms of epigenetic, environmental, and genetic models. So aggression, we all exhibit it from time to time. It's a means of survival, especially when there's competition. You have to be aggressive to get what you need. It's in today's society, it's more used as a way to get what we want and express our emotions like anger, hatred, dislike. So I'm going to talk about the behavioral genetics side of aggression first. So this model kind of views traits and behaviors in terms of genetic predispositions, and then when we surround ourselves with the right environment, these predispositions really shine through to give us the behavior or trait. So there's polymorphisms, and these are just variants in the DNA sequence. So typically it has to do with a base pair. And you can think of it like an allele. You get one allele from your mom, one from your dad, and they combine and they give you your genetic makeup, your genome. So there is a gene called the MAOA gene, and it has been linked to aggression, and it's kind of known as the aggression gene because it predisposes people to be aggressive. So it was discovered that people who had 3 repetitions of alleles on this gene had lower activity levels of the gene, and those who have 4 repetitions of the allele have higher activity levels. And those who grew up in this study, children who grew up in abusive or neglectful homes, they looked at their genes, and they saw that they had the lower activity level, so they only had 3 repetitions of the allele. So the lower activity level of the MAOA gene is associated with tendencies towards aggressive behaviors, whereas those with higher activity levels of the gene usually don't exhibit aggressive tendencies and behaviors. There's also the COMT transcriptor gene, and this one, it was discovered that those who were homozygous for the gene, meaning they had 2 of the same alleles, that was associated with low activity levels of the gene, which was then associated with high aggressive tendencies and behaviors. And those who were heterozygous for the gene, meaning they had 2 separate alleles, they had high activity levels of the gene, and that gene, the high activity levels, was then associated with low tendencies towards aggressive behaviors. So those are just some of the aggression genes that have been discovered that predispose us to aggression when we are in the right environment for it. So now I'm going to talk about the environmental influences. It's typically the negative, adverse, kind of poor environments that cause us to be more aggressive, especially like in infancy. So those who are reared in an abusive, neglectful home, whose parents don't pay attention to them or don't really care, those are the ones who are more aggressive. And even parents who are overly harsh and too much discipline, that harshness can be perceived as a threat to the children. So they kind of use aggression as a means to protect themselves from that harshness. And then that can then carry over, those perceived threats can carry on over into peers at school. They may think that their peers are threatening them and they respond more aggressively. And you also have like the environment itself. So like poor neighborhoods, poor school systems, those who grow up in poor neighborhoods, they don't have the proper resources and opportunities to put themselves up in a higher social standing. So then they kind of have to use aggression to fight for their way of life, their means of survival, especially those who are poor and live on the streets. They use aggression to obtain their needs because they do not have the money to go out and buy it. So it's competitive in that nature. So and also this one is the most controversial in today's society, is the influence of violent media, violent TV, violent video games, it was shown that exposure to violent video games did have some influence and made it a risk factor for aggressive behaviors, but also those who were surrounded by good environments didn't usually express aggressive behaviors, because those good aspects of the environment kind of overrode the negative influence of violence and aggression in video games and media. So that's an interesting thing to note. So now we're going to talk about epigenetics. This is the process of how the environment actually changes the way a gene is altered through the way a gene is expressed through alterations in these epigenetic processes. So typically we talk about DNA methylation, and this is just when methyl groups are added to base pairs. In the case of, there's cortisol levels, and low cortisol levels are associated with aggressive behaviors. So there's a certain receptor, cortisol receptor, and this gene, if it does not receive enough methyl groups or it's undermethylated, then it's associated with low cortisol levels because it's not able to receive as much cortisol, and then those low cortisol levels give way to aggressive behavior. And the same goes for oxytocin receptor gene. If it receives too many methyl groups, then the gene does not work as well, and therefore the oxytocin receptor does not function the way it should. So you're getting low oxytocin levels, and those low oxytocin levels are associated with high aggressive tendencies. So that's kind of a little bit of epigenetics. It's just how the environment works to alter the way the gene is expressed. And it even happens in the womb. So prenatal care is important because it regulates kind of these epigenetic processes. So that's all I have for this presentation. I hope you all enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.